Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. Did you know that several black families were invited to help settle BC and help claim it from the Americans? Chances are you probably didn't, and that's what's bothering me today. So, one of these early black families in question was a woman named Sylvia Stark. Now, Sylvia Stark was born a slave in 1839, but her early story is quite fascinating in the U.S. She was born into slavery in Clay County, Missouri, and though, like all slaves, she was forbidden from learning how to read or write, she actually still learned how to do it anyway and in secret because she listened in on her slave master's children's lessons. Because of this, this would help her later in life in terms of finding work and also helping to flee from the United States. Now, her father was a cowboy, and he accompanied his employer on a cattle drive to California. Now, while her father arrived in California, he was actually allowed to prospect for gold there because that was beginning to happen at the time. As a result, he used the money to purchase his family's freedom. In total, her father paid a sum of money of $3,900 in those times, which was a lot of money, and that was $3,900 worth of gold. And to give you an idea of how much money that was, the annual stipend, if you want to call it that, for a sitting U.S. congressman was $3,000. This was a not insignificant amount of money that this man paid for his family's freedom. Now, with that in mind, he was in California, thought, hey, you know what? This California place is pretty nice. And this brings us to the next part of Sylvia Stark's story. So they settled in a farm in Missouri initially, but the KKK had to go and ruin things. And so because of, the terrible night riders and the raidings and the beatings, they decided, you know what? It's a little too intense here in the wake of the American Civil War. Let's actually move to California. I prospected there. It seems like a good place. It's a free state. Let's move there and start a farm. And that's what the family did. So the family moved to California in 1851 as part of a wagon train, which Sylvia herself apparently loved to, regale stories with her children with in the future. And so in 1855, at the age of 16, she married a dairy farmer named Lewis Stark, hence why her family name became Sylvia Stark. They would eventually have 7 children, many of whom would go on to serve in a variety of roles down the line, same with their descendants. And unfortunately, though, while they thought that they would be a bit more free of the Ku Klux Klan, and they were, what happened in 1857 was the infamous Dred Scott decision, which said that black people were not citizens really of the United States. What was it? The 3/5 compromise or something like that. It was a bad scene. So with that in mind, they realized, okay, well, sure, we're free, but we don't really have rights. Geez, is there something else we can do where we can really have freedom and, maybe not equality, but true freedom and some civil rights? This is where the move to BC comes in. So, at the time, the governor of the colony of British Columbia, James Douglas, who himself is pretty largely considered to be the father of British Columbia, and he himself was actually the son of a white man and a free Creole woman from the Caribbean. So James Douglas is, a quarter black man who was the governor of British Columbia, who, of course, was very sympathetic to the plight of black people, but also to indigenous people because his wife was a Métis woman. So that's a little bit about James Douglas. I'll probably do a video on him at some point. But the focus is Sylvia Stark being one of 600 families, many of whom, the families of freedmen and people in the Western United States who were invited to come and settle British Columbia as, free citizens and British citizens in order to help firmly secure it as a British colony rather than a future American colony, territory, or state. As a result, they moved to Vancouver Island, but they found that the farmland was a little sparse because, again, still racism. And so they moved again, and this made them one of the first settlers on Salt Spring Island, which is kind of a famous island out in BC for being pretty, beautiful and hippie and artistic and creative and just fascinating. It's kind of like its own thing. So Sylvia Stark is one of the first settlers on this island, especially at a time when it still had a lot of mountain lions and grizzly bears. So they settled, they cleared the land, they became very successful and fruitful farmers, and they just kind of continued to live not in total happiness. She eventually divorced her husband and then lived with other family members up until the ripe old age of 105. And eventually she would die on Salt Spring Island, surrounded by her friends, families, and loved ones in 1904, I believe, or 1944. Now, again, I get that she's not super historically significant in terms of first black businesswoman, first black lawyer, but she plays a crucial part in establishing British Columbia as a British colony. A black woman born into, slavery and, learning how to read and write on the sly and being part of a wagon train and moving out to California and working hard and constantly searching for freedom, peace, and equality. It's, a part of our shared legacy in Canada and the United States, but it also impacts British Columbia, which again helps, lead to the Canada we have today. British Columbia is a part of Canada because of the promise of a railroad and by concerted efforts by people in charge to ensure that it did not become American because they were proud to be British subjects. And Black people played a part in that, including in what lots of people consider to be predominantly white, or, it should be white, BC. It's infamously known that in the Pacific Northwestern United States and in BC as well, there's a lot of white nationalists. And yet, the land is native and Black people still had a part to play in the history of this land for centuries. And the fact that more of us don't recognize this and appreciate this is definitely what's bothering me today.